Hi, I'm William Holes, the Strategic Partnerships Manager at Demand Logic, and I'm going to run through the presentation which I provided at the Maintenance in FM show event. And it's very much looking at the technology today and how that's changing facilities management, and in particular, how it's changing maintenance and how we're using that data in maintenance to improve and adapt in the way that we work. So starting off with the trends, and I think everyone who's looking at this will understand the trends within property and facilities management. And I'm going to start with the well-being because it's such a buzzword at the moment. It's a very hot topic, and it's being looked at by every single one of our clients. And that's not just our clients as the property director or the facilities manager. It's being looked at by the CEOs and boards of our clients' companies, because they're starting to realize that there is science and findings that supports this idea that the office has an impact on their employees, and by making a better office space and making it work better is going to have a positive impact on their people, and it's very much being driven from them. And there's lots of science, lots of research going on around well-being and what impacts it, whether that's lighting levels, air quality, or just general office setups, and how that affects the productivity of people, which is sometimes contentious, but it's definitely a hot topic in the market at the moment, and moving the market probably more than any of the others. Another one which always seems to come up, and it's not anything new, but it's something which definitely gets looked at that similar level of a board and chief executive and C-level executives, where they're looking at the energy side of things. So on the other side of the slide, it's something that's very apparent, with there's being a massive push to reduce energy, reduce carbon usage, and also the cost benefit that comes with that. And I think a lot of companies are starting to look at that as a key area of cost reduction. And then more locally to the property and facilities management market, is very much relevant these days because of the news of Carillion going into liquidation and the problems that that's caused, but also the upset within the market, which has caused the likes of Mighty, Interserve and Capita all to release profit warnings. And I think that very much comes from the fact that the race to the bottom is finished. There is no further place to go because there's such lack of innovation in the core delivery of the service. The FM companies and the big players that have grown exponentially over the last 10 years or 20 years even, they're starting to deliver or try and deliver contracts at an unsustainable level, where they're bidding contracts and trying to operate at 3 and 4% gross margins, which is seeing them really struggle, but it's also affecting how they operate as a business. And then even more applicable to this presentation in particular is the growth of the smart buildings market, and with the explosion of the Internet of Things and the availability of technology and the data that comes with that technology. And it's very much something that there's a lot out there, and there's been a few for a while now, but it's very much a case of there's still a bit of tentativeness towards utilizing technology, because some people have got their fingers burnt and some people have had bad experiences with people over-promising and under-delivering, especially from a data analytics perspective. So it's very much a case of, from our perspective at Demand Logic, it's changing that mindset to actually create useful data without the high capex costs. And I think all of those issues all of those trends get pushed down to the lowest level, which unfortunately is the FM company. So they're asking the FM company to provide a better workplace for their people, use innovation within your service. I want a cheaper cost, and I want you to give me some energy savings as well. And that challenge comes directly from clients, where they want a much higher level of service but a much lower cost. They want to, when they go out to tender, they want to be able to have a better service than they had before, whether that's from their existing supplier or another supplier, at a lower cost than they were paying before, or the same but more. So it's a challenge that gets put on a lot of FM companies, which then in the cycle leads them to reducing their cost and almost over promising, but not being able to deliver because they cannot afford to. So I'm sure many of you wouldn't have expected to see a car on a presentation about maintenance, but it's quite a good way to explain where we are in the property market nowadays, because if we look back at 1990 and a car from 1990, they were very basic. The only time that you knew there was a problem with the car was when you were on the side of a road with a flat tire or smoke billowing out of your bonnet, and therefore you could only fix a problem really once you knew, once it was too late, once the problem already occurred and you had all of those issues with the car already, which in turn makes it worse. And therefore, well, not therefore, but that's where we are with our buildings today. We're waiting until there's a problem before we actually fix it. There are PPMs, but I think the majority of people in the maintenance market in particular will know that a PPM is more of a visual inspection, and then any remedial works that need to be done then get booked in as a reactive job. So those PPMs are very much just making sure that everything looks and feels right. We don't actually create any repairs or do any proper maintenance until the problem has already occurred. And with cars, we don't do that anymore. And even though the RAC tell us that every time before we go on a journey, we should check the oil pressure, we should check the tyre pressure, the oil level, the coolant level, everything within the car before you go on the journey to make sure that everything's set. In reality, not many of us do that, and the reason is because we rely on the car telling us, because there's onboard diagnostics and a dashboard that tells you when there's a problem. And other than a warning light tech coming on and telling us that we've got a low tyre pressure, or you need to top up your washer fluid level, or you need to check your engine oil level, we're not going to look under the bonnet. So we're not actually going to investigate or try and identify if there's a problem. And little short of getting our car serviced and MOT'd once a year, we let it run and we listen to the car until the car tells us when there's an issue. Now, our car's a lot more complicated than the majority of plant we have in our buildings. AHU, for instance, is a very simple piece of kit, but yet we're maintaining those twice a year. Fan cool units, very simple piece of kit, but we're maintaining those 2 to 4 times a year. So why are we maintaining kit 2 to 4 times a year that's a lot more complicated than our cars? And that all comes back down to the dashboard. There is an element within the cars that tells you when there's a problem. We don't have that for our buildings. Most people don't. But we do have that. We can have dashboard for buildings, because the problem with cars and why it took so long for those dashboards to become part of normality was because you can't retrofit a car with the technology required to provide that dashboard. But with buildings you can. And whether that's a 250-year-old building such as the Royal Academy of Arts, or a relatively new building like the Walkie Talkie, Demand Logic especially can install and retrofit the building to bring it up to modern standards and provide that dashboard to tell you where the problems are within your building. And we don't want it to be a case of 25 years before this becomes the norm, because we don't have to wait for that cycle. We don't have to wait for all of the current buildings to be knocked down into rubble and then go into all the new fancy buildings. we have this technology available today, and we can provide that insight and that dashboard to your buildings, and that can provide the insight to where the issues actually are, and you can start addressing them when there's an issue, rather than carrying out pointless PPM inspections and then dealing with a lot of reactives after it's too late. So coming on to where we believe that the market should be moving to, and how the use of technology can change that. And I think ultimately there's three key areas, and the building users for me and us at Demand Logic have to be the focal point, because if it wasn't for the building users requiring their job in their office to be there, then none of the facilities or the property or the technology companies would be here, because there wouldn't be anything to support. So they have to be the focal point. They're the reason that we're here. They have to be the focal point of what we're doing. Moving to demonstrable performance and changing how the way we actually measure a successful contract, and moving towards a more tangible benefit model. And then lastly, I want to look at how we can improve margins but reduce the cost of the building owner or the end client. And it seems very strange, but I'll come on to how we do that later on. So as I said, building users, they have to be at the heart of what we do. They're the most important thing. The recent WeWork model and how they almost appeal to the end client. It's almost a B2C business, and that is such a successful business model for them, because they are almost appealing to the building users, and they're starting to attract different companies to do the same thing. So they do have to be there, and there is a market there, but ultimately they need to be the focal point of us delivering a successful FM service, because that is why we're here. And there's no reason why one of our clients, one of our building users, shouldn't be able to go into their business and work in a comfortable and productive environment without having to worry whether they need a jumper, whether they need to wear a t-shirt because the office is always too hot, and bring a jumper just in case because it's occasionally too cold. And all of those worries that they've got a very stressful job, I'm sure. They don't need that on top of their worries. And the problem is that property budgets are always, or not always, but often spent on aesthetic improvements. And it's very much a case of out of thin air, when an FM provider has been asking for budget for improvements in X and Y, they say, no, sorry, we can't. That's all gone into the agile working budget, where they're bringing in fancy new desks and refitting the floors and putting in new meeting rooms and collaborative working spaces. And yes, it looks amazing, but we're not addressing the actual core problem. And yes, it might have a great effect on staff morale for the first couple of weeks, where they're in a bright new shiny building, it's lovely, it's modern, got a fantastic coffee machine, they've got these new meeting pods. But after a couple of weeks, when it's still too hot or it's still too cold or the lighting's still bad, they're going to get more demoralized than they were before, because ultimately you haven't sorted out the root cause of the problems, which is in the major plant or the control strategy. And this isn't always because of the property budgets or things like that. I think one of the main things is that as FM providers and maintenance providers, we're starting on the back foot. A recent study by Innovate UK found that on average, 50 new commercial properties were 4 times less efficient than the requirements of the building regulations. And the best was 2 times less efficient. And that's 50% as efficient as it should be to the baseline standard. That's not the best it can be. That is the baseline standard, and it's only halfway there. And the worst performing was 10 times less efficient. And these figures aren't lies. They're a genuine study by Innovate UK. And property managers and FM companies and maintenance companies take over these buildings where they're going in blindfolded, because all of these issues haven't been resolved, and this is just new buildings. with old buildings, it's still the same. There's still historic issues that are sort of hiding underneath plain sight, and we've got a blindfold on as maintenance providers, and we get almost shocked by these issues because we didn't know about them. And we're going in blindfolded, but technology can shine the light on the issues, and it will highlight where those issues are. And if it's a new build, you can take that information and go back to the construction company or the fit out company and ask them to actually do what they said they'd do. Because there's a lot of things going on around BREEAM and energy efficient buildings and everything, but that's just the design that gets signed off. There's not actually many tests that look at the core operation of a building once it's functional. So the maintenance and the FM side of things, they're the ones who get put in the bad light, whilst the build contractors are the ones celebrating and saying, look at my amazing building. But unfortunately, there's lots of issues with it, and it's not working properly. But once you can shine that light on it, it gives you a tangible list or a known quantity to actually resolve those issues. And I'm sure many of you, if you've ever been to or seen any presentation about well-being or productivity or IoT within a workplace, you would have seen this image from the UK Green Building Council, and that's because it's a very good indication of showing that you can have a small impact on the big areas, which is your staff costs, and that will be a much more cost-effective way of providing a customer satisfaction, shall we say. But if we look at this from one of our views as demand logic, which is our terminal road finder, every single one of those dots represents one person, and every single one represents a terminal unit. The orange are fine, they're operating well. The blue aren't operating so well, and the purple is operating really badly, miles outside its set point. As a maintenance provider, you will have a PPM on those terminal units, and you'll say, guys, come in this weekend, and then every quarter, get 4 guys in, and then work your way up the building and do all the maintenance on the fan coil units or VAVs, whichever ones they are. And by doing that, you're maintaining or inspecting the ones which are working well already. So you're going through all the way up to the building, and all the while, the ones at the top are the ones that aren't performing. So it's not going to be until the very end, and it could be a year, nearly a year later, that you actually get to the ones which are the problem. Whereas if you utilize the data and systems like demand logic, you can see where the issues are, and when your guys are going in at the weekend to do the terminal unit maintenance, they can go and address those top 10 issues. And by addressing those, you're going to have a positive impact by making your maintenance team more effective and more efficient, because you won't need as much time to do that fan coil unit maintenance because you know the 10 that you need to address. So you're not just going floor by floor. And you're also actually having a better impact on the comfort of those people, because you're addressing those issues where in the building they're occurring, and then you'll see a domino effect where you'll get a reduction in reactive calls, which then in turn gives you more time for your engineers to do what they're supposed to be doing rather than dealing with reactive. But also by resolving those issues, you're actually reducing energy cost, because that purple one might be simultaneously asking for heating and cooling, but that could just be because of a faulty sensor. And it's a very simple fix, but ultimately, by addressing those issues and using the technology to get that data, you've had a massive impact on the staff because you've increased the comfort, you've reduced your reactive, so you actually have a better impact on your business, and you've also had an impact on the energy. The second one I wanted to talk about was very much about moving towards a world of demonstrable performance, and currently it's extremely frustrating from someone who used to work in the FM industry in the world of KPIs and SLAs, because they are so mundane. It's very much, how many PPMs have you done this month? Yeah, you've got 99%. How many of your statutory have you done? 100%. How many of your reactives have you done within the time? 95%. Brilliant. That's okay. Tick that box and put that in a folder that we'll never ever look at again until we do the annual review and we get an average performance. Ultimately, that is actually not providing any benefit to the client's business, and it's not providing any benefit to the FM provider, because all it's saying is we're doing our job, we're doing the job that you told us to do. And it almost becomes a beating stick, because then they have financial penalties assigned to them and they want you to fail almost because they want to get that money back off of you. And then the FM provider sees that as very much just covering their backs, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they can prove that they've got that threshold, so they're not getting financially penalised. If we move towards the way we look at KPIs, which are output KPIs, where they have a tangible benefit, if you start measuring, for instance, on there we've got our KPI actions progress report. If we start measuring tangible outputs and relive that scenario of SLA and KPIs in a monthly meeting, we move towards a world where we're saying we've identified 93 tasks which need to be prioritised, and we've completed 37 of them, all the P1s, and that in turn has had a positive impact because the reactive tasks are 75% less than they were last month or this time last year. And in turn, because we've done that, we've given you a £27,000 saving on your energy. But don't worry, we'll carry on working because we know there's a further £39,000 worth of saving and another 56 jobs to do. So we'll carry on doing that. But from a client's perspective, yes, you've done their statutory maintenance, you've done their mandatory maintenance, but also you've made their building users more happy because they're not making as many reactive calls or comfort calls. You've made your maintenance more efficient and you're identifying the problems and resolving them. So you're elongating the life of their plant. So you're actually having a benefit on their capex because you're maintaining the items of plant that need maintaining. And then you've also saved them money. You've physically saved them money on their energy costs. And for me, that's a much better conversation to be having with the client, because that is it's a word used a lot nowadays, but it makes you sticky. No one's going to move away from you if you can prove you're having all those benefits for a client. And it's a much better way of analysing success on a contract than saying we've done 95% of your reactives tasks. And then finally, I wanted to talk about reducing costs and how we improve margins. And I know that might seem a bit combative, but ultimately we want to look at how we can utilise technology. And as I've been speaking about the other ones, we want to utilise technology to make our maintenance regimes more efficient and more effective. And using an example where you have one engineer, you have 4 engineers on site. One of those is solely down doing PPMs, doing the same thing week in, week out, month in, month out. He's having a very good time, just trudging through, doing the same things. And then you've got 3 engineers who are running around like dealing with reactives and actually getting frustrated because they keep getting the same complaints, but they haven't got time to support their PPM engineer. So they're just dealing with reactives. Now, if you take that model out, but you've still got the same amount of people, as I mentioned previously, if you implement that maintenance regime where you're addressing the issues and you do manage to reduce your reactive tasks by 75%, which isn't unusual, that's not a figure that we've plucked out of thin air, it helps for the maths, but ultimately we see between 50 and 100% reduction in hot and cold calls when you install our system and you utilize the system in the way it's supposed to be used. So if you do that, then you move 2 engineers to a proactive maintenance regime. So your guy doing the PPMs and one of the reactive guys, they're now your proactive guys. So they're doing your statutory, they're doing your mandatory, and they're also assessing the system and dealing with all the tasks that are coming out of the system, where the building as a dashboard is telling you what's wrong with it, where it needs attention. That leaves you with the other 2 guys, but you've already said you reduced your reactives by 75%. You had 3 guys doing it before, so now you only need 1 of those guys. So you've got one guy dealing with the low number of reactives that are less, but then you've also got the remaining engineer. We're not in the business of telling you what to do with your teams, but there are a couple of ways where you can reduce the cost to the client and also improve your margins. And that might be a way of talking to the client and saying, look, we've reworked the maintenance program. We've got an engineer. We're going to reallocate him to another contract, and we're going to give you half the cost back, and we're going to keep half the costs as added value to yourselves. Because nowadays, most contracts are output spec. So as long as you're delivering the contract, you'll be fine. But also there's the added value side of it. So you can use that engineer to complete projects and minor works on site or across the portfolio. And by doing that, you'll be giving them added value because they're not taking it out of their CapEx budget, but you'll also be getting an extra margin for yourselves where you're also getting margin on the equipment and materials to complete those tasks. So you're actually making more money while spending less. And it's just a new way of looking at things because it can be a much more effective and efficient scenario of making money because we do need to change the way the contracts are running at the moment to move to a more sustainable model. And just summarizing, I call it the 1990 special purely because of SFG20, but although there have been minor innovations, I say at a contract level or at a business level, the fundamental principles of SFG20, the 1990 special, are still there. We're still doing planned and reactive maintenance, where we're now delivering at such low margin, we might have to take a punt on comprehensive, but we could win, we could lose. And then you become reliant on projects and additional works to actually be sustainable. So you're almost milking the client to try and get more out of them in terms of projects so you can actually hit your budgets, and you start battling against what your company wants as the FM provider. You need to hit your budgets, but then the client doesn't want to spend any more money. So it just becomes a client versus business, and it's not a very sustainable model. And when I say the new old way for the data-led property performance simplified model, is it's not anything revolutionary that we're trying to do or that we are doing, because ultimately we are looking at condition-based maintenance, and that's something that's been around for quite a while, and various companies and various individuals have done it, and they've done it successfully. But the problem with that is that you are reliant in the old model of very, very competent engineers who are paid way too much to be going around and assessing plant and giving it a rag status on the condition of it, and therefore assessing how often it needs to be maintained. And then that needs to be kept up. So it's very manual and it takes a long time. So that individual then needs to go in on a quarterly basis, 6-monthly basis, annual basis. If they leave, who they're going to hand over with, all of those problems that you get, which then ultimately leads to moving back to just the PPM and the reactive regime because it gets too complicated and you've got too many factors. So the new part of the new old way is the data that's available using the technology that we've got. And we've already established that we can retrofit that dashboard to give you the information that you need. And I gave the example a couple of slides ago where we can look at the proactive approach based on live data, focusing on output KPIs where the client gets cost savings, more value for their money, and the FM provider or maintenance provider makes more money. So you get reduced costs and increased margin, and this can be the new world of engineering. And this isn't something that is a pipe dream, it's not a proof of concept, it is something we're doing now. Demand Logic are in over 100 properties, covering over 10 million square foot of office space around the world. It's not just in the UK, it's something that is the foundation of which is very simple, where we find it using the data, we share it using our technology, and then we share that, and the guys on site know what the problem is, so they can fix it, and they fix it at source. And then a couple of examples of where we have done this, because it isn't a pipe dream. Mace, a very big name, they do their own FM. They've got teams that do this and look at this, but they believe in us and we work with them very closely. Their headquarters in Moorgate, we identified £25,000 worth of energy savings in the first 3 months of being there. And that was against an energy spend of 210,000. That's over 12%, over 13% of energy savings within 3 months. Against the cost of the system, the return on investment was within 7 months. And we reduced their hot and cold calls by 50%, which then supported them looking at how they deliver their maintenance regime. So they're looking at changing that now to the model where we're looking at. And then leads for BT, not all in London, where we identify £50,000 worth of savings within the first 3 months of plugging in. That's the cost of the annual service was just under 22 grand. So your return on investment 6 weeks, and then you've also got the reduction in hot and cold calls. And for BT, that was a much more important element. Yes, it's great to save money, but it's quite a heavily dense office space because of the business that they do there. So for them to be able to say that our staff are happier due to the reduction in hot and cold calls, clearly they're more comfortable, and that is a much better metric for them saying that this is a success because they can control it and their people are happier. And for them, that's huge in the business that that building operates in. It's a huge retention tool for their people as well. And that is where we are. And if you've got any queries or questions about the presentation, or you want to discuss with me further, my contact details are there. Sonny Macero, our chairman, his details are there as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.